Thanks for joining me on episode 584 of the Inspired Stewardship Podcast.
I'm Bob Loddick from Seed Time, and I challenge you to invest in yourself, invest in others, develop your influence, and impact the world by using your time, your talent, and your treasures to live out your calling. Having the ability to grow your money like a seed is key to learning God's way of handling money. And one way to be inspired to do that is to listen to this, the Inspired Stewardship Podcast with my friend Scott Mater.
That there's something here that I need to take action on. I need to recognize, is this fear something real? And if it is, what actions do I need to take to reduce the possibility of that coming true? Or is this fear something that appears true on the surface, but as I look at it and dive into it a little deeper, it isn't really true?
Welcome and thank you for joining us on the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. If you truly desire to become the person who God wants you to be, then you must learn to use your time, your talent, and your treasures for your true calling. In the Inspired Stewardship Podcast, you will learn to invest in yourself, invest in others, and develop your influence so that you can impact the world.
In today's episode about investing in others through stewarding your talent, I talk with you about why fear is often a signal that you need to lean in, why bravery isn't the absence of fear, but doing it anyway, and learning how to listen to fear without letting it stop you.
You've heard me talk about developing your talent, and one of the best ways to do that is through books. But if you're like most people today, it's hard to find the time to read. And that's why today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Go to inspiredstewardship.com/audible to sign up, and you can get a 30-day free trial. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from, and you can pick one and listen your way to developing your talents via Audible. That's inspiredstewardship.com/audible to get your free trial and listen to great books the same way you're listening to this podcast.
Fear, bravery, courage. These are words that we use all the time, but I don't think we ever stop and think about what they really are, what they really mean for us. You know, fear is one of those things that most of us live with at some level most of the time. I mean, there are things that happen that we're afraid of. We use words like I'm afraid of spiders, or we're more afraid of things like our family getting sick or perhaps losing our job. In a time like now, that fear tends to be accelerated. It tends to be magnified, and for good reason. You know, fear is not a bad emotion. Fear does a job. Fear is often a signal to our body and our brains that there's something that we need to pay attention to. Even when that fear is false, it's still signaling that there's something that we need to pay attention to. See, that's the interesting thing. Fear by itself doesn't create action or inaction. It's an emotional response. It's an important one. It's a real one. And it's one that we often feel. And we need to be aware of that. We need to acknowledge that. We need to recognize that emotion. But then we also need to take a little bit of space and breathe for a minute and focus on, is this fear real and a signal that there's something I need to pay attention to? Perhaps I've allowed something to happen that creates the possibility of me losing my job. Or perhaps I'm seeing what's going on in the economy and I recognize that there is a real possibility that my company could have to do layoffs, or it could have to reduce salaries or something else in response to the way that they're being affected by the larger economy. If that's true, if there is a reality to it, then you need to begin to take action. You need to lean into that situation and that fear and take action to do something to help prevent it. There's also fear, though, that is, the false evidence appearing real. You've heard that meme or that acronym for fear before, that it stands for false evidence appearing real. And that's true, too. There are times when we have fears that we feel that aren't really a true signal of danger. We have that feeling that there's a lion out there that's going to eat us, but the truth is the lion is simply getting in front of a group of people and speaking. And yes, it may be embarrassing. Yes, you may mess something up, but at the end of the day, you're not going to die. It's just not true that it will kill you. And yet your brain will tell you that that's true. So there are fears that are a signal that you need to pay attention to them, but not in terms of taking action to reduce the fear. Instead, the action that you need to take is the action of doing it anyway. That's whether you want to use the word courage or bravery. That is, to me, the definition of courage and bravery. It's not the absence of fear. We say this about brave people sometimes. We'll say things like, oh, they acted without fear. But when you actually interview people that were in the situation and acted anyway, they'll tell you they were terrified. They were frightened. They were very concerned. They were worried. And yet they took action anyway. They got up on the stage. They began to put things in place so that even if they lost their job, they could take care of their family. They began to learn new skills or develop things that they weren't really sure they could do, but they pushed themselves beyond their comfort zone, and they stretched and they worked. And they did it not because they felt no fear, but because despite feeling the fear, they recognized that they needed to lean into it and take action to actually make that fear go away, to make that fear something that it's not that they never felt it again, but the actions that they took allowed them to begin to push that fear away and do the work anyway. This is one of those skills that whether you want to be an entrepreneur, whether you want to be a small business owner, whether you want to just grow yourself in some way and learn a new skill, whether you want to be prepared for the next time there's an economic downturn, and there will be a next time, whether you want to be set up and protecting yourself and your family in a way that maybe right now you're not able to do, what you need to understand is you have to learn to listen to the fear and turn to it and kind of almost have a conversation with it. I usually think it when the fear shows up. I literally say thank you to the fear. Thank you for showing up. Because when you show up, it tells me that there's something here that I need to take action on. I need to recognize, is this fear something real? And if it is, what actions do I need to take to reduce the possibility of that coming true? Or is this fear something that appears true on the surface, but as I look at it and dive into it a little deeper, it isn't really true, in which case I need to seek out accountability. I need to seek out new tools and new people that I can surround myself so that I can adjust my mindset and begin to behave and act in a way that allows me to do the work, not because I don't feel fear, but despite the fact that I feel it. What can I do to make that easier? What can I do to set that up? Do I need to get a coach? Do I need to reach out to somebody else? Do I need to read a book? Do I need to take some sort of positive action? Do I need to find the smallest, tiniest little step that moves me in the right direction and begin to take that every single day? This is the way that you learn to be brave, by learning to recognize fear when it shows up, to take a little bit of time and breathe and let yourself feel the emotion, but then to step beyond it and begin to have a conversation with the fear, to let it tell you, what is it trying to warn you of? What reality is it trying to point out? And what actions do you need to take so that you can be brave and take the actions despite feeling fear, instead of not because you never felt it? Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much for listening to the Inspired Stewardship podcast. As a subscriber and listener, we challenge you to not just sit back and passively listen, but act on what you've heard and find a way to live your calling. If you like this episode on the stewardship of talent, You can go over to inspiredstewardship.com/talent and sign up for our 5-week series on the stewardship of talent. Or if you're in the U.S., you can text 44222 talent tips. That's talent tips to 44222 and get those tips. Until next time, invest your time, your talent, and your treasures. Develop your influence and impact the world.